Hi, everyone. My name is Ryan Carlson. I graduated Northwestern in 2006. I was a history major, and I'm currently working for the law office of the Cook County Public Defender as an assistant public defender. I've been an attorney there since 2012.
Great. And now we'll go to Rachel.
Hi everyone, my name is Rachel Shine. I graduated Northwestern in 2013. I'm a social worker currently working in my own private practice in Evanston.
Great. And now to Sarah.
Hi, my name is Sarah Wawema. I graduated Northwestern with a degree in environmental science in 2018, and I'm now working as a staff scientist at an environmental consulting firm in downtown Chicago.
And now to Andrew.
Hello, my name is Andrew Christie. I graduated in 2014. So I started very undecided Weinberg and ended history and international studies. That path then led to development, fundraising side of things. I'm now at the Alzheimer's Association, their headquarters national office, which is here in Chicago, and I work on a galas and partnerships team.
Great. And if you're here, we'll get started with our first question. And what were some of the impactful classes or experiences for you while you were at Northwestern that led you to consider your chosen helping careers path?
Yeah, definitely. So I had, as you can probably tell by the major, it doesn't initially sound right off the bat like it's directly related to a development in that path. So as much as I enjoyed everything and kind of building those skills with history and international studies being kind of the classes I enjoyed, the critical thinking analysis, writing, things that went into that, really were the majority of what I'm doing now is in the extracurricular space. And so one of my favorite experiences was getting involved with Dance Marathon and just being able to kind of see the community be able to come together through something like that, and the power of kind of just gathering the entire Northwest community, kind of working with the different beneficiaries that we were able to work with, and just kind of see the difference that you could make, and kind of understanding that that can be a career. And from there, I was really able to understand, like, hey, I joke now about I was events side of things for Dance Marathon, so helped put on kind of some events throughout the year leading up to the weekend of, and that's essentially what I do now. I work in fundraising and development, and I've worked within specifically the event space of that, so kind of turned that into a career. I didn't even realize that was a career path, or that was even something that would be possible. So it was just something like, hey, I really enjoyed this during my time at Northwestern, and so spending some time later on, like junior, senior year, seeing what those opportunities looked like and what was possible towards this path.
That's great. Thank you. And let's go to Sarah.
So funny enough, one of the most influential classes that I took was a literature class. It centered on environmental justice and environmental studies. Going into Northwestern, I knew that I wanted to study environmental science and climate change specifically, but there are just so many ways to do that, and I was trying to do it all at once during my short time there. And I started off studying plant biology and conservation, which I loved because, one, plants are ubiquitous and they're such an important part of our lives and our urban systems, which I liked. And I got a lot of technical skills in statistics and in spatial analysis that I still use in my job today. But that class in literature really solidified that I was really interested in the intersection of data and science, but also environmental policy and social justice, because those two things are so linked. And in my job now, or even going forward in my career, I'm really interested in seeing how science and data can drive climate policy, especially as it comes to equity and prioritizing the people who are the most at risk for the repercussions of climate change overall.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And Rachel.
Yeah, I forgot to say earlier that I was an English literature major and a film minor. So my time at Northwestern wasn't really spent working on social work or psychology or anything like that. So the most impactful experience I had there that did lead me to this career path was getting one of the Weinberg grants over the summer. I applied for one of those grants to write a screenplay because I was on this path where I thought I wanted to write and do film stuff and stuff like that. And so I spent the summer writing a screenplay where I interviewed a lot of people to do research for the screenplay. And I found that I loved interviewing everyone and listening to their stories and getting to share in those experiences. And I really dreaded sitting by myself and actually having to write the screenplay. So that was the summer before my senior year. And so then senior year, I just started thinking to myself, well, what's a career where I could sit and talk to people all day and hear their stories rather than, focusing on writing and being by myself. And that's what led me to my career path. So the Weinberg grant for me was the most helpful.
Yeah, that's really great. Thanks. And Ryan.
So I was a history major, and I think like Andrew, it doesn't necessarily lead itself directly to a lot of careers. So, as I was getting further along in college, I started to think like, what am I going to do with this? Because I picked history because I enjoyed it. I was studying it, and I wanted my college experience to be enjoyable. So, as I progressed along, obviously some of the natural fields that you can get into are law, teaching, stuff like that. Teaching didn't really interest me, so I started looking at law and opportunities that Northwestern offered to get into that field. And I think that my summer in between my junior and senior year was the first year that they offered a legal field studies course. So that was really helpful in me in figuring out if this is really what I wanted to do. For the legal field studies course, they placed me in the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, which is the opposite side of where I am now. But I was able to be in court every day. I was able to kind of study the different roles all of the players in court had, and it really just kind of opened my eyes up to what my eventual career would look like, what the day-to-day stuff was. And then going back and talking with the class about how those roles play out in society and stuff like that really kind of opened my eyes to something that I wasn't aware really how it works, why it existed, stuff like that. And it kind of directly led me on the path to where I am today.
That's great. Thank you, everyone, for sharing. And I'd love to dive into a little bit more about your first job and if it was exactly what you were looking for. And then kind of a side question, if it wasn't your first choice or your plan A, can you tell us more about how you approached strategizing with your career at that point? And Ryan, if it's all right, we'll start off with you.
Sure. So my first job after I graduated kind of started as like a part-time job while I was still in school. It was with a small law firm. Some of you guys might be aware of it from the Netflix documentary Making a Murderer. I worked for Kathleen Zellner. So I was basically like a pre-law school law clerk. So I would do like some basic research. I would do a lot of intake calls. I would visit clients in prison and stuff like that. And I got really lucky. I kind of, coming off the legal field studies course, I realized that I wanted to do something in law. I was strongly considering law school. I wanted to make sure that this was the right thing before I made the big commitment, time-wise and financially, of going to law school. So I wanted a job in law, and I was able, through family, friends with other lawyers who were able to find someone who was looking for a law clerk position, and I interviewed and I was lucky enough to get it. And it just kind of solidified what I was looking for, that I wanted to go to law school. And it kind of led me more down the path that I'm at now, working in criminal defense. I wasn't sure that I wanted to do that, but it kind of planted the seed, like, this is what you're here for.
That's great. Great that it led you down a future career path that you enjoy. Perfect. Let's move to Rachel.
Yeah, so senior year of college, a lot of the English literature majors like myself were exploring Teach for America. And so I started applying to TFA, and it appealed to me for many reasons, but I couldn't really see myself actually teaching. So I ended up finding another program called Children's Corps, which is essentially TFA, but for social workers. And I got into that program, and what it was it trained like a cohort of about 40 different recent college grads at Columbia's social work school over the summer after my senior year of college. So we trained for about 6 weeks, and then they placed all of us into different foster care agencies throughout the 5 boroughs of New York City. So I got into it not knowing much about foster care, just having these few weeks of trainings. But I worked at my foster care agency as a caseworker for 2 years. And it was a lot of home visits, a lot of family court, supervising visits between parents and their children, working with schools, and just a bunch of different elements of the community all coming together. And I loved it. I couldn't even believe it was a job. I thought it was just the most interesting, exciting, wonderful experience in the whole world. And it, like Ryan was saying, also solidified my decision to go to grad school to get my master's in social work. So spending those 2 years doing that job then kind of solidified that path for me.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's really great. Thanks for sharing that resource. And I saw Laura drop the link to that organization in the chat. So definitely something to look into. Thanks, Rachel. And we'll move on to Sarah.
So during my senior year at Northwestern, I was still very much so considering plant biology as a career path. So not only was I applying for full-time jobs, but I also applied and got into Northwestern's master's program for plant biology and conservation. And everything for me was just very much so up in the air, my whole senior year. And during one day, winter quarter, I had it in my mind that I really wanted to study urban planning. But I just didn't know how that would end up happening. I definitely did not feel ready to apply to an urban planning program and jump into a master's program, but it's very hard to work in that sphere full time without a graduate degree. And I stumbled across the Northwestern University Public Interest Program, which is a year-long fellowship through Northwestern that places recent Northwestern grads at different nonprofits and government agencies in Chicago. And when you apply to NUPIP, you're not supposed to apply to the program just to work at one specific place, but that's what I ended up doing, and it just ended up working out. So I was placed at the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, which is the regional planning authority for Chicagoland area, covers about 7 counties. And I ended up there, and it was exactly the experience that I wanted and that I needed. The great thing about CMAP was that, unlike other planning authorities, they were really data driven, and they were able to show me how the numbers, not only how numbers translate into policy, but also taking into account the public as, I guess, like our clients. So I was able to do some data analyzing and get more comfortable with geospatial data, but I was also able to attend a lot of public events and public hearings and seeing how planners organize the thoughts of their communities that they're serving, and then translating that into like the built environment that the public wants to see for themselves. So that was a really great experience, but at the same time, I felt really like I knew even going into it that without a planning degree, I wasn't going to be able to do anything that exciting. So that experience also solidified that I wanted to go to grad school to work in that sphere. And right now I'm considering either urban planning or a master's in public policy.
Awesome. That's great. Thanks for sharing more about your first job and next steps. That's great. And we'll finish this question out with Andrew.
Yeah, sounds good. So first job, I'd say I had no idea what to expect, knowing that this was kind of a new career path and wasn't all that familiar with it. I didn't even know what exactly I was looking for or what to expect. So it did make my, I guess, senior year that much more interesting too, of just still being in that space of trying to figure out, hey, what do I want to do? What the path's going to be? And so within development and fundraising within that space, also knowing that their timeline is very different than the fall consulting and all that stuff, that it's like, if you're going to be hired, it's going to be right around May. It's going to be right around April, May, June. So I had time to figure that out, but it was obviously a little bit stressful as everyone else getting jobs. So it was definitely in that position, but was able to kind of just, again, evaluate what I most enjoyed kind of during my undergraduate career and time at Northwestern. And so, like I said, that was with Dance Marathon and really all the other activities. I was able to get involved in a bunch of different areas and that I really enjoyed. And one of those being my fraternity and getting into the philanthropy community service aspect of that. And so our national beneficiary at the time was ALS Association. And so I had gotten involved a little bit with some volunteer work, and just that being a national organization was more familiar with it. And so that actually, knowing, hey, I have a connection here, being able to talk to some local Chicago chapter area people about that organization led to that being my first role. There happened to be a position at their national office that was out of Chicago. And so that ended up being my first role. And again, the expectations, didn't know exactly even what it was going to look like and whether that career path was for me. But one of the highlights about that first role ended up being, especially because it was in development, there are so many different areas within fundraising that you can look at and go into, that it was a coordinator role and quote unquote kind of jack of all trades. And so it did really open my eyes and allow me to venture into a lot of different spaces, whether it's major gift space or other specific areas of kind of what fundraising within an organization like that looks like. And then was solidified by, luckily enough, being there during the Ice Bucket Challenge as well. And so just kind of seeing that was one of the defining moments too, of like, hey, this not only organization, talk about working out, but this career path really being like, hey, this is definitely for me, because I hadn't done an internship in that space, so I didn't know exactly what it looked like. So I kind of treated the summer as, hey, if this isn't for me, I'll have time to figure something else out. But obviously stuck it out and know I've kind of been obviously in development of fundraising since and have really enjoyed it.
Yeah, that's really great. And I love that you guys all come from these very different industries, and hearing stories about your first jobs, all kind of, leading you towards more further into those paths. I think that's great. Like that none of you are still in that first role, but it led you to these other jobs that you're learning that you really enjoy, or, more about future paths, like Sarah had mentioned about grad school. So I think that's great. And I'd love to move into what has surprised you about your arts and science background that you use today in your work in these various industries.
Yeah, definitely. So I mean, I'd say again, mine being with, it's like, hey, history and international studies, exactly kind of how that relates. And I even think back to kind of pulling together cover letters for, hey, you're going into fundraising, but you have this history and international studies. Like, what does this mean? And really just being able to speak to both the academic and kind of like obviously the rigor standard, everything that goes into that with the entire Northwestern population and just everything that goes into that I think you don't even realize at the time when you're going through it, as well as then definitely speaking to kind of all those extracurriculars, which obviously I've touched on a little bit, but I'd say the biggest surprise is kind of just how easily we were able to build that baseline through the general arts and sciences. And I talk about that all the time, even in my role within development. Fundraising is such a big space that there's so many different areas that's exactly where I'm still at in my career, is building that baseline of there are like five, 6 different paths that you can go, whether it's peer-to-peer fundraising, whether it's direct marketing, all these different areas. And so I'm still very much at the path where I want to get that entire base and just kind of have that general skill set to be able to go into any of those. And I feel like Northwestern really prepared me, and just classes in general, kind of everything that we did really prepared me really well for that, to be able to kind of have that skill set to look at all different things, whether it's just the general time management, whether it's taking notes, even at meetings, and being able to then kind of condense that and work that into different projects that I'm working on, as well as then kind of the project management piece. I'd say any of the group work that we were able to do, both inside and outside the classroom, was something that and these organizations, just realizing that's like not everyone has this type of background, and it's something that I didn't think that much of, but was something that I felt very prepared for, and were a few key skills that I was really comfortable with and able to kind of utilize right away, that I still have been building on throughout my career.
That's great. Yeah, what you use and what you're building on. Thanks, Andrew. And we'll move to Sarah.
Yeah, I would say something very similar to, excuse me, what Andrew was talking about, in that when I felt clearest about what I was doing in undergrad, when I stopped thinking about it as a time to really narrow down what I wanted to do, and more of a time to just build basic skills that could be translated from industry to industry. And that really came into play my senior year, because I was looking at my resume and I was looking at the things that I'd done throughout undergrad, and I realized that I'd never worked in an office. I'd never physically sat down and had a day-to-day job, and that would kind of be a hindrance when it came to looking for a full-time job, which is where I saw myself heading towards. So I really had to look at my science background and look at my internships where I was working outside and doing field work, and really thinking about the ways that I could translate those and market myself when it came to looking for a job. And I realized that with an arts and sciences degree, they're things that you'll need to do that make you marketable no matter what industry that you go into. And for me, that really meant highlighting my technical communication skills, which is something that you have to do. Was just like ubiquitous in like the job when you're looking for a job. It's just and for me that meant writing a senior thesis and having just like a palpable document, like something to really show that I value technical communication and communication in general, that I'm good at taking data or taking a lot of information and distilling it down to a cohesive document. And when I was going into the job industry and going into interviews, it's something that I spent a lot of time highlighting and pointing towards.
That's great. Thanks for sharing. And we'll move on to Rachel.
Yeah, just piggybacking off of what everyone said, I think that the arts and science degree really provided me with a solid foundation in terms of connecting with people from a place of curiosity, which I think I really gained through the reading and writing skills, through all my English classes that I took and film classes and stuff like that, which at the time I wouldn't realize applied so directly to the work that I do now. But, in terms of my first job of being in foster care and really entering people's homes and having to make a really quick connection with them at the door, especially, going into certain situations where they definitely didn't want me there, and it would benefit both of us if we were able to connect. To right now, working in private practice, each time I meet with a new client who I haven't met with before, they can often be in crisis and want to feel like they're in a safe space. And it's just like the 1 or 2 minutes at the beginning of each session when I have the ability to make that quick connection with someone, that's really important for the job. And I think that it really is something that I credit to Weinberg and the classes that I took there. So not such a direct path, but I think it really is. It's very true.
Great. Thanks, Rachel. And we'll finish out this question with Ryan.
I don't know if it's necessarily surprising to me, but I think the research and writing skills that I developed in my studies at Northwestern have been so productive in my career. And while it kind of makes sense that that's going to be helpful in law, a lot of my colleagues and people who I come across in my practice, where it's more in court focused, don't necessarily have those skills. So I've found that my ability to write well and my ability to research well and do it efficiently and quickly has given me a leg up in my field. A lot of my colleagues come to me for help in those situations. And again, while you would think that, oh, this makes a lot of sense, not all people in law are coming from those backgrounds. So having those research and writing skills from researching history papers, writing history papers, stuff like that, gave me a huge leg up in trying to find a position, and continues this day. When I was looking for a job as just finishing undergrad before law school, highlighting that on my resume that I did a lot of research, I did a lot of writing, I think made me more attractive, because that's what a lot of people are looking for in an intern or like a law clerk, someone that can do the dirty work for the attorneys so they can present that in court. Makes their job a lot easier, save them a lot of time. I think that helped me find my job right out of undergrad, and it helped me find my internships in law school as well, being able to highlight those skills.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is great hearing how the broad-based background influences each of your industries in, just a slightly different way. I think that's great. And Ryan, we'll start with you for this next question around networking. And again, I'm sure networking plays a different role, an important role, but differently in each of your lives. I'm curious, what advice do you have for networking in your industry, and also in the time we're in now, knowing that we're all connecting virtually? How would you recommend students reach out, and can you give them some tips on how to best network at this point in time?
So it's kind of tough coming out of undergrad, because most legal positions are, if they're looking for interns or looking for an entry-level position, they're looking for people who are either in law school or have just finished law school. So I got extremely lucky in that I found a position that was well suited for me coming right out of undergrad. What I took advantage of is, it may sound kind of silly, but I let my parents know what I was interested in, and they started talking to their friends. They put me in touch with their friends, who put me in touch with their friends. It's really just it takes a lot of legwork, and it takes persistence and the ability to put yourself out there, and just talk to as many people as you can, and let people know what you're interested in. And I think that especially in these times, people are looking for ways to help. Not everyone's always tied up and busy all the time, so people have a little bit more time. I think that's the best way to say it. Put yourself out there. Don't be afraid to not get a response. Don't be afraid of rejection or anything like that. It was something that I had some trouble with in law school. In law school, I was a pretty shy person, and I hadn't really found my voice yet, and it took me a little while. But I think not being afraid to write an email, not being afraid to get on the phone makes a big difference.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thanks, Ryan. And we'll move to Rachel next.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that when I was in college, I would always really worry about reaching out to people for networking. I would feel like I was a burden on them or kind of asking too much of people. But now that I'm in the opposite position, I can say that I'm always so flattered when people reach out, and I think most people are. It's a nice way to boost someone else's ego a little bit, and we're all just trying to help each other out, especially the Northwestern community. So I think definitely don't be afraid to reach out. And I think in particular for my field, the social work therapy field is super broad, and it can be really confusing in terms of, do you want a PhD? Do you want a PsyD? Do you want a master's? Within social work, there's so many different focuses and specialties. So I think it really is necessary to talk to people and to pick their brains. So yeah, don't be afraid to do that.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. And Sarah?
Yeah, I would say, especially as an undergrad or as a recent graduate, a lot of the times when I was networking and putting myself out there, the feedback I was getting was very positive. So many people out there are looking to mentor young people in their fields. And the other feedback that I got a lot was just, oh, I'm so glad you're doing this. I wish I was doing this at your age, or I wish I was making these connections so early in my career, just because it really just shows how proactive you are. And I was even surprised in my job search after my fellowship, how many people were reaching out to me saying like, hey, I heard of this opportunity here. It was nice talking to you at such and such event. Let me know if you're interested in applying to work at this place. And even virtually, I'm still finding myself like making those connections and reaching out to people that I've had internships with for even just general advice at my current job, even if I'm not just looking. So I would highly recommend reaching out to anyone that you've worked with, any professors. Like everyone has been saying, I've never reached out for help and it hasn't bitten me. And pretty much getting no response is the worst thing that could happen. And I would say in the environmental sphere, especially the one in Chicago, it's quite small. So even if you reach out to someone who's only like adjacent to what you want to do, there's a high chance that they're going to know someone who's perfect for you to talk to and would be happy to connect you. So that's been my experience networking in Chicago or in the environmental circles.
Yeah, that's such a great point. Like some of the industries can really be such close, tight-knit circles, and connecting with one person really can open up those doors, which is awesome. Great, and we'll move on to Andrew.
Yeah, so I mean, networking, as I know, yeah, some people love it, some people hate it. It's definitely something to be looking into, and I think the biggest thing within what we call the voluntary health space, that's the positions that I've been in. So the Alzheimer's Association, Heart Associations, American Cancer Societies, those types of places all have so many different roles as well. And so I just went into the development and fundraising side of things, but even just figuring out all the different positions that are at these takes exactly the research and talking to people, and want to go more on the marketing and communication side of things, or the data development side of things, or the fundraising side of things. So obviously there's huge value to it of just even figuring out, making sure whatever you're looking into is something that you're really interested in. But I'd say the biggest piece of advice for my space specifically is that there are so many built-in networking opportunities that it's such a volunteer-based system and approach, is that, though not to add more things on your plate, obviously know how busy everyone is, but the volunteer opportunities are something that you should definitely be looking into, but also recognize that they're not just the in-person, like physical hours opportunities. They're, hey, being a social media ambassador, joining this Facebook group, just kind of getting to know a little bit more about the community. So that is something that I always tell people about, because unless you know the organization or you're connected to it, you don't really think of that as, hey, this is just such an easy built-in networking opportunity. Even if you want to start your own fundraiser, you then have a built-in staff person that's assigned to help you with that fundraiser, that is somebody that their job is to be stewarding you and to talk to you about your event, sure, but once you then develop that relationship is when you can talk to them about, hey, this is why I'm doing this event, this is what I'm interested in, would love to talk to you, would love to talk to your colleagues about kind of how you guys got involved. And love hearing from people. I mean, people love talking about kind of their career paths, and it's always something that is from, and people want to help other people, especially obviously in the Northwestern community and circle. So right now, I'd say obviously have some patience because it is so unknown. I mean, unfortunately, we've just had to make layoffs at the Alzheimer's Association, first time that's occurred since I've been there. And so obviously a tough time for the space in many ways, but also we'll have more time. So see if there is an opportunity, and of course, just being appreciative for people's time and making sure to always send thank yous, even if it is just like a quick touch base. Shows that you're taking that extra step and extra effort.
Yeah, definitely, Andrew. That's great and a really helpful pivot point, because before we get into student questions, I definitely encourage students share those in the chat while alumni are answering this last question. But I'm curious if there are ways, in what ways, because I'm sure everyone's work has shifted because of this global health crisis we're in, but what are the ways that your work and your industry has shifted due to the crisis that students should be aware of if they're looking to enter into your industry in the next year or two?
Yeah, so I'll be able to kind of start with, I'm specifically on the galas and partnerships team, and so all of our galas, our in-person events, have completely been postponed or shifted virtual. And so right now, I mean, we're still obviously right in the middle of it, but it's kind of the time to be creative and to be able to utilize people that you think of ideas and brainstorm ideas for connecting virtually and being able to fundraise and be able to utilize that. And something younger generation in general is something that you're bringing a lot to the table of just being able to be familiar with this and understanding kind of how some of these different processes and things work, that a lot of the brainstorming and a lot of the ideas that we've been a part of have been people that aren't familiar at all with these technology, and so are looking to, hey, do you guys use Instagram? Do you use a couple of things that otherwise aren't even necessarily there? So I'd say that's kind of the both short and long term of just being able to brainstorm creative ways, and we're moving a lot of things virtually right now. So that's kind of where that in the future, being able to kind of get back to a sense of normalcy. But yeah, right now it's obviously figuring out kind of how to change things, and just being able to see how we can still connect. That what we say kind of in our space too is like, with everything else going on, it's like we exist for a reason, and the mission is still there. And so being creative as to ways to still achieve that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Andrew. And let's hop to Sarah.
So just to talk a little bit more about where I work at BBJ Group, which is an environmental consulting company headquartered in Chicago, but we also have offices around the US. A lot of our clients are in real estate. They're looking to buy or sell property that may or may not have environmental contaminants on it. So a lot of our work involves going to the site, looking to see if there are any environmental hazards, any workplace hazards, documenting them, and then monitoring the site if that is the case. So because a lot of our work is centered on federal and state and local regulations, a lot of work just has to continue, and I'm actually considered to be an essential worker. So in that way, our work hasn't had to really pivot too much. Like we of course, we're not flying anymore on sites, and our compliance team has had to put together work plans for how to safely go on site, and protocols for even hand washing and any protective equipment that we might wear. So in that way, we haven't had to pivot too much, but I know that on our management team has been looking into being creative and partnering with different organizations that are closer to some sites that we can't reach anymore, figuring out new ways to just even connect and to make sure that us as employees and colleagues are still having that face-to-face connection and still talking to each other, because the relationships that we've had aren't purely for fun, even though they are, but they also mean that we're still collaborating and innovating the ways that we're approaching our sites and our work overall.
Yeah, that's great. And so you're still an essential employee, so your work is moving forward. And thanks for sharing, Sarah. And let's move to Rachel.
So all of my work with clients has moved to Zoom or phone sessions. So that's been lucky that I'm still able to work from home in that way. And just for mental health in general, I mean, it's a good time to be in the mental health field and a really hard time. I mean, it's good because people need therapy now more than ever, of course. And it is a field where we can all continue to do the work, and it's very necessary. But it's hard just because, of course, now we're all kind of your therapist is going through the same experiences as you are. So it's kind of like the curtain's been pulled back a little bit, and it's more of a mentality of we're all in this together. And it can be hard for, I know, just other friends who are therapists or social workers. I think it's harder now to kind of keep the boundaries up and to kind of manage your own emotional reactions, just because we're all struggling now. So definitely pros and cons.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing, Rachel. And Ryan, we'll finish this question out with you.
Yeah, so my field is kind of been like uniquely hit. As a public defender, I'm technically an essential worker. Courts have largely been closed though, since the shutdown in mid-March. So my role, instead of advocating, for my clients' cases and fighting for them to win their trials, has largely changed to fighting to get my clients who are incarcerated out of jail, to protect them from the risks of contacting coronavirus in the jail. As some of you may be aware, Cook County Jail is one of the nation's largest hotspots right now. So my duties have kind of changed to focusing just on decarcerating the population that we can. We were having to go into court initially. Within the last week, they've changed everything to Zoom hearings. So we're able to do that work from home now, and able to do virtual court from home. It has been a lot more difficult because we can't go to the jail to see our clients, so we have to set up phone calls. They let us do Zoom meetings with our clients in jail now. But we're kind of antiquated in that we still use a lot of paper, so we've had to get creative in figuring out how to solve certain problems. So we're still doing our job. It's just the focus has kind of shifted, and we've had to think of a lot of creative solutions for the new problems that we're facing.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all for sharing more about how this has impacted your industries and your individual work. And we do have a student question from Lucy. And if we want to take it in the same order, Ryan, Rachel, Sarah, Andrew, Lucy, if you want to turn your microphone on and ask that question off to alumni.
Sure. Hello, I'm Lucy. I'm a freshman. And my question is, did you struggle with narrowing in on one passion or interest? And did this play a role in your initial job search?
I didn't really struggle too much. I knew that I was interested in law, and as I said before, the legal field studies course kind of helped me a lot in deciding that this was something I wanted to explore more. I think your question is good for me in terms of narrowing down my focus in the fields of law. Once I decided that I wanted to go to law school, how did I decide what field I wanted to practice in? One thing that I found very helpful was keeping my options open. My first job with Kathleen Zellner, she did criminal defense, civil rights, and medical malpractice. And all of those are kind of in the field of helping people. So, I enjoyed the criminal defense and civil rights more. And I kind of, one thing I did throughout law school was keep my options open for both of those fields. So in law school, I did an internship with the Cook County Public Defender, which is where I am now. But I also did an internship with a law firm called the People's Law Office, which does more exclusively civil rights stuff. And I was interested in both of those. I preferred civil rights, but I'm sorry, I preferred criminal defense, but I wanted to keep my options open in case I was having trouble finding a job in that field. So when I graduated law school, I kind of started applying to firms that did civil rights and firms that did criminal defense, just to keep my options open. So I would recommend, not narrowing too much and keeping some other options open, because the job fields, there is ebbs and flows, and sometimes the market's great, sometimes it's not. So keeping your options open definitely helps me.
Great, thanks, Ryan. And we'll move to Rachel.
Yeah, it was definitely hard for me to narrow my focus. I actually started as a theater major, and then I switched to English, and then I took on film. So I was kind of all over the place. But I totally agree with what Ryan says, where it ultimately didn't really matter if I was narrowing my focus or what focus I picked. I just realized by, I guess, my first job that it was more about what are the values that I'm taking from each of these different focuses, and more like, how do I want to spend my day? And that those were kind of the more important questions for me, because that really is what we're all looking for in our career. And I found that when I was asking myself those questions, that all the focuses had, the same, but if it was film, if it was theater, if it was English, it was all kind of connecting with people and hearing people's stories. And so it all kind of blended together in that way. So I wouldn't worry if it's hard right now to pick a focus.
Great, thanks, Rachel. And to Sarah.
Yeah, I totally agree 100% with everything Rachel was saying, in that you don't really have to pick your focus if you don't want to, depending on the type of field that you're going into. So for me, I pushed off concentrating on one specific field as long as I could, and I even did that after I graduated. Most of the reason why I ended up accepting the offer with Northwestern University Public Interest Program is because, even though I was really interested in urban planning, it was only a year-long program, so I wasn't really committing to that being my foreseeable future for the next even like 3 years. And the more I worked, the more I realized that people pivot in their careers all the time, and it really, if you are making that huge career jump, sometimes it's just as simple as talking to the right people and just having the ability to market yourself and show how the work that you've done before has value. So using that, and especially going to networking events, I remember going to this one planning networking event and talking to this guy who had been in finance for about 15 years, and all of a sudden he decided that he wanted to work in urban planning. And that's just wasn't out of the ordinary, and there wasn't a question as to what, if there was enough space for him to just pivot and work in urban planning. So as Rachel said, I would think about the values you have and think about the day-to-day that you want, but also know that you can keep your options open, and you shouldn't be afraid to take a hard left if that's what you want.
That's great. Thank you, Sarah. And we'll finish with Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, just to echo what I mean, I was, I think, undecided basically as long as I could be, officially major-wise. So it was something that, even looking back, it was something I was like worried about and kind of stressed about, of even just picking the majors, like, hey, is this going to be right? That really glad what I ended up doing, of just like, hey, I really enjoyed these classes. This is what's very interesting to me, and kind of will be able to figure it out along the way. And so that's kind of what I did. And I guess to speak to the networking piece that we talked about, that's really where I was able to further build out some of those, because I know what I wanted to do, further build out like, hey, what am I looking for, and ask the right questions. And even ask, my favorite question kind of with networking was always about people's paths, and just hearing from their path of like, how did they decide to, it's like they're with their first job, things like that. I think it's a great question, and something to keep in mind of one, yeah, your first job, even for me, once I even had that job, I did still, because it was May, so I had some time. That was like, I'm going to still stay networking. I don't know if this is exactly what I want to do, but then once I was able to settle in, I was like, yeah, hey, this is, I'm very comfortable with this and loved it. But wanted to make sure that like, hey, I'm still talking to people and figuring out what those roles and